So let's look at how being a victim of emotional incest can show itself in our adult life. Sometimes people may think just because I've been emotionally smothered doesn't mean it's going to play out in anything much else than just me being resentful towards my parents. Well, having resentment and anger towards your parents for emotionally taking you over will likely appear, yes. But there's many more insidious ways as to how this can follow you through your life if you're not careful. Today, let's look at 7 examples of this. Now, I've done many videos about emotional incest, so for those of you maybe who are watching me for the first time, I'll leave a link in the description box below where you can watch my video, What is Emotional Incest? And that can give you a broad overview. So one way this may show up in our adult life is not owning our own masculinity or femininity. Quite often, because we were emotionally smothered by the opposite sex parent, which is very common, we then begin to think as a child growing up that we have to play a role as to what being a boy or girl means. This role commonly involves being a people pleaser, being what mommy or daddy wants me to be, and in doing that, we wipe ourselves clean of what it means to be an authentic child. So because of this and messages we're given about ourselves that we're not really good enough, those are the messages, right? If we have to play a role for our parents, if they don't really want to get to know the real me, then there must be something wrong with me, which includes my masculine or feminine side. So adult males can struggle with this in terms of masculinity, adult females can struggle with this in terms of femininity, and sometimes they even may want to dissociate or somehow cut off the essence of even having these traits. Number 2, having challenges dealing with money and or finances. So growing up in the role of being a little me, parents didn't want to help you blossom and grow into a healthy adult. That's what emotional incest is all about. Then many victims of this are not taught about handling finances. Because after all, that would be a sign of being a grown-up. If your father or mother sat with you when you were 10 years old or 12 and showed you how to open a checking account, establish some sort of savings, teaching you about working with credit in a responsible way, saving for the future, all these things would imply a parent is seeing their child wanting to help them be successful when they're in their 20s and 30s and 40s, and that's the opposite of emotional incest. So many kids are not taught how to do this. Plus they're in the role of just having to be the little kid who goes along with things, which then doesn't help them to learn about the responsibilities and tough decisions that sometimes go along with managing our money. Number 3, problems with decision making, either making decisions too quickly or not being able to make decisions at all. Now again, making decisions implies that we know ourselves, and making decisions means we have to decide something and stick with it, which implies a certain level of maturity to do that, which is going to be a struggle for someone who's a victim of emotional incest. And so hence, they can be very wishy-washy as they get older, checking in with other people for their advice about making an important decision or even not an important decision. Wanting feedback, wanting external validation for their decision, right? Because you had to seek external validation to get love from your parents, right? You weren't taught to love yourself for who you are, so you had to rely on this illusionary love from the parent. So now somebody's in their 20s or 30s, and they're either avoiding decision making, let's say, or making decisions that are not in their best interest, maybe based on what others want for them. That's not healthy. Or on the flip side, because of not being helped with their emotional maturity growing up, they act in an impulsive way and make snap decisions like that, which ties into immediate gratification, right? Impulsivity, compulsion, immediate gratification. Oftentimes because there's no core here. They don't know themselves, and so like a child putting their hand into a candy bowl and just grabbing anything, they're repeating that behavior. That's how they were raised, right? They weren't taught about making adult decisions. They weren't helped with that. And so now they're trying to figure it out as an adult. Well, through no fault of their own, they don't know how to do this. And hence, quite often, they'll just follow the first shiny object that goes in front of them and bam, make a decision and then find out it's not in their own best interest. Number 4, being a bit too much of a loner. Now, there's nothing wrong with being a loner in life, liking spending time with ourselves. Solitude, for example, is very healthy, nothing wrong with that. But that's one side of the pendulum where it's healthy. The other side of it where it's unhealthy is if we're sort of running from life, isolating, turning into a bit of a recluse because I don't feel safe. Well, how's a kid who's been emotionally smothered for years growing up going to necessarily feel safe in life unless they get some therapy, for example? They have to better understand what happened to them. So because of that, maybe now they have social anxiety, they don't feel comfortable relating to others, and so hence they may pull back from life in general, which again can be okay to a degree, but many times it'll go beyond that to where somebody's isolating and not believing they're even really capable of having healthy friendships or a healthy romantic relationship. So this can be a perfect storm setting itself up where then someone who's now an adult pulls back too much. They can even now slip into clinical depression perhaps because of this. So I have to be careful with this one, but it can be quite common for victims of emotional incest. Number 5, sometimes victims of emotional incest are going about their life. They're now an adult and doing well. That can definitely happen. Perhaps they've had some therapeutic work, but be aware, because of the fundamental training that happened for many years during an important part of your life through all your childhood, sometimes you may backtrack a bit, and that's okay. So don't beat yourself up if somehow you catch yourself later relating to somebody. Maybe it's a coworker or a family member, like you don't have any power. You feel completely powerless. You find yourself being robbed of your voice again, just like you were robbed of your voice by your own parents. They don't want to hear what you really had to say. So have a lot of patience and empathy with yourself if that sometimes during your adult life, depending on the circumstances, depending on the level of stress or anxiety, you may retreat to some old roles to get yourself through something that's uncomfortable. Just catch it, be aware of it, and then as soon as you can, bring yourself back into your adult you who's now in full command of your life and not running from anything. This takes a bit of practice, but the key is to keep being aware of it as it's happening. Number 6, because there was nothing real with your parents, you were always a chameleon putting on an act as a way to survive the childhood. Because of this, they may have a habit of running out on others. Kids who are victims of emotional incest, who are now adults, tend to want to avoid any kind of conflict or something that's going to make them feel vulnerable. And so hence they tend to run away from things. When the going gets tough or a little too scary or they feel vulnerable, they may just get out of Dodge. You may just ghost the entire situation, get out of there. And lastly, number 7, being bullied gets normalized somehow. Because in a way, being a victim of emotional incest is being bullied, right? And so sometimes we can bring that energy into our adult life. Other people can pick up on it, and victims of emotional incest can be taken advantage of. Remember, they weren't allowed to stand up for themselves as a child growing up, so it's likely going to be harder for them initially to stand up for themselves as an adult. And people who like being bullies or are narcissists can easily pick up on the energy, and then it becomes normalized for the victim of emotional incest, and they just think this is their lot in life. This is just the way life is. Well, no, it's not. But the first step is to realize that it's not normal, and then to start calling yourself out on it in terms of, why am I taking this? I don't need to take this at all. We have to challenge ourselves on these deeper levels, but sometimes victims start rationalizing things to where, it's okay, it's just my personality, and really it's not your personality at all. It's how you were toxically conditioned by your own parents to grow up like somehow you don't matter. It's all about your parents' needs. And when we're focused on making our parents safe in their life rather than the parents making the child feel safe in their life as a healthy mentor or a healthy guide, then all of this gets scrambled. We have to work on this as an adult to where I am not going to normalize being taken advantage of in any way any longer. So I hope these 7 ways are helpful to many of you. Emotional incest is a very insidious type of abuse. It's done under the guise of love. That's why it's hard for people to see it, the victim themselves, as well as people in their life. They may be looking at this so-called victim and say, what do you mean? You had it great. Your mother loved you to death. Well, almost so, right? Or your father loved you to death. It's hard for people to see that the focusing on the child was mostly about turning that little boy or girl into their little mini husband or mini wife. So please leave me some comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts about this video. Feel free to leave number 8, 9, or 10 in the comments section below. If you have other examples you'd like to share, please subscribe to my mental health YouTube channel if you like these kind of videos. And until next week, this is Brad Shore signing off from Ask a Shrink.